So, as I said, we have blocks of semi-improved grassland across the farm, and this plan we expect to be able to roll out into all of those blocks. Now, some of the farm is flatter and some of it is steeper, as you're going to find out in about an hour and a half, I guess. The flatter parts we are going to split into smaller paddocks. We're going to do that by planting shelter belts of trees. So all these dotted lines you see are going to be 10-metre shelter belts of trees. Also, these blocked out green lines are going to have trees behind them as well. So you can see where the original field boundaries are. We're going to plant trees in between those field boundaries, and then we're going to split the fields with these shelter belts. That's so that we can rotationally graze the animals. These blocks of flatter ground, so I guess one thing to say is this is still wood pasture, it's just not wood pasture as you might envision it. It's not big open grown standards in a parkland environment. This is still trees with animals grazing underneath it. These flatter parts that have been split into paddocks, we're then going to fence, because we have a rather substantial deer population who would probably quite like to eat some of these trees, and we want to give them the best possible start in life. So we're going to deer fence around the outside of these blocks. The thing to say about all of our fencing is it's going to be electric. So all of the internal fences are going to be electric, and the external fence, the deer fence, is also going to be electric. The deer fence is something that we're going to be trialling. So my boss, Kev Davies, he used to work up in Mar Lodge where they had a big deer problem, and they tried this type of fencing and it worked for them, so we're going to try it here. Basically, and I can talk to anybody in a bit more detail about it if you're interested later on, but it's offset electric fencing. So the highest strand is about 5 foot. So you have 3 strands of electric fencing. The lowest strand is at the front, and then you have 2 higher strands behind it. And the idea is that the deer they're inquisitive, they'll come and they'll look at the fence, they'll try and put their heads over it to see if they can jump it, they'll get a bolt off the fence, and then they won't touch it again. As I said, this is something that's worked incredibly well up in Mar Lodge, and it's something that we're going to try here. So that's our holistic grazing, our rotational grazing areas. These outer areas we're going to leave as extensive grazing. So this will again be wood pasture, but instead of the big treed shelter belts, we're going to have blocks of trees. So we're going to plant blocks of 15 by 15 metres, and that will eventually, hopefully, in 50, 100 years, well past my lifetime I'm sure, be those big open grown standards that you're more used to seeing in a parkland setting. As I said, we've got about 7 blocks where we're going to roll this out in various different fashions. So obviously, each bit of land is different, and we're having to walk all of that and see what suits that bit of land. So some of the blocks are going to have more of the rotational grazing, some of them are probably going to have more of the extensive grazing. It just depends on the land and what we think would work best within that. So why are we doing it? Why go through all the trouble of planting all these trees and the holistic grazing? First of all, there's the benefits to nature. At the moment, as I said, we've got the Watersmeet woodland on one edge, we've got the coastal woodland on the other edge, and we've got absolutely nothing really connecting the two. So in terms of habitat connection, in terms of those corridors that nature can use to move around, we have to plant more trees. It's just, we have to. And then there's all the things that come with that. If you think what you'd like from a home, nature really wants the same things. It wants somewhere safe to nest. It wants somewhere to feed and get its, to feed itself and feed its young. It wants somewhere to hibernate. All of those things are important, and different animals need different things. Some of them will benefit having that longer grass. On cue. Some of them will benefit from having that longer grass, some of them will benefit from having those trees in the landscape. Benefits, public services. This is going to be a big one for everybody going forward, I should think, especially the way the elms trials seem to be going. Trees in a landscape, rotational grazing, everything points to more organic matter in the soil. You know, you've got more organic matter, you can hold more water. With trees in the landscape, you've got better carbon sequestration. Benefits to the animals, obviously, as people who care for animals, this is big, this is top of our agenda. We want them to have the best bites of grass. We want those good live weight gains on them, because at the end of the day, as I said, it's got to be sustainable economically. So, you know, we want those animals to be getting the best forage they can. Having trees in a landscape means they have a much more diverse diet. There is a lot of talk about how animals will self-medicate if they're offered the chance of a more diverse diet. I know from, so as you'll see walking around, we're at the very, very early stages of this project, so we haven't planted any trees yet, but we do have some willow trees in our hedgerows, and I've seen our cows, when they're moved into paddocks, they'll go straight for the trees. You know, they'll just strip them out, and they're looking for that diversity in their diet. The trees offer them much better shelter. It's you know, some parts of this farm are 300 metres above sea level, and it's horrendously exposed in the summer and in the winter, and so trees offer them that shelter they need. And you know, if your animals are happier, and this might sound a bit, but if animals are happier, they're gonna have, you know, they're gonna have better weight gains. It's like you, when you're happy, your body's happier, isn't it? You know, we all kind of notice that, and it's no different for these animals. So we are lucky here because we have a sandy loam, so we're very free draining, so we don't get that kind of the water and the poaching that you might get in winter. So the animals are able to outwinter, they can stay out all year. But also the rotational grazing for those people who don't have that, you know, those kind of soils, it can really help with the water retention and the water drainage in your soils. So possibly the animals can stay out for a bit longer than they might be now. And that's just a benefit for them because, you know, they're not nose to nose all the time in sheds in the winter, so the disease risk is much lower. Reduction in flies, I mean, more invertebrates on the land, you know, especially the dung beetles are absolutely brilliant because they have the fly larvae away. So, you know, that's a definite other benefit to the animals. And pasture fed, their stomach biome. Like, cows get such a bad press, and a lot of it is based on these big feedlot animals who are fed cereals, you know. But if we're pasture feeding the animals, they're eating a diet that their stomachs have actually evolved to deal with. So they're not pumping out all the gases that you know, we're led to believe they are. Also, their biome is much more balanced. So the bacteria that's in their stomach, some of that comes out in their poo, and then that helps the soil because then that's the bacteria in the soil that's helping to deliver much more, you know, much healthier soils. So really the benefits to the animals of these systems are just, you know, they're 100-fold really. And finally, benefits to the farm business. You know, like I said, we're not here as the National Trust to make a lot of money, but the farm does have to wipe its nose. And so this is a concern for us. This is something that I have to balance. Having the animals outwintered obviously lowers your costs immediately because, you know, you're not having to pay for their feed, you're not having to pay for their bedding, you're not having to empty sheds out or worry where all their manure is going. It's a low input system. So it's minimum intervention, so obviously that's lowering your time with the animals, so your cost in kind of wages, and we're not really medicating the animals. The only thing these guys get is we have a huge tick burden here, and we have to treat for that because otherwise we do start losing animals. The cows have their spot on, and the sheep have their crowbeck. And they do have some vaccines before they go to the bull, but other than that, we don't treat for anything. Heritage breeds. So heritage breeds are much better suited to these systems. There's no doubt about that. And yes, they do take a little bit longer to finish. But having said that, I think there's two things in that. They might take a bit longer to finish, but the meat quality is incredible. You know, like the fat is actually marbled through the meat, so it cooks in a much different way and has a much more distinctive flavour. And, you know, these heritage breeds, if you market it in the right way, they can absolutely command a premium. Biomass as a product, I think Rob's potentially going to talk about this a bit later, but actually, you know, how can you make the most of the trees that you're growing in your landscape? How can you make some money out of that? And also, you know, there's this cutting tree hay. They're all options, you know, so tree hay is where we're pollarding the trees and then we're using that, we're harvesting that growth to feed to the animals in the winter months. It's kind of a method that was used quite traditionally and one that has sort of pretty much died out now. But again, you know, it's something to try. So challenges and thinking points. So this sounds like a wonderful system and there's tons and tons of benefits to it. But of course there are some challenges and things to think about. The first one is designations. So for example, we sit in the national park. We also have SSSI, so sites of special scientific interest, and we also have archaeological sites. So they're all things that you need to consider before you maybe start planting trees or changing the landscape in any way. If you are already farming and you are looking to change, you know, there is this question of suitability of animals and that crossover period, like how are you going to change your farm over? They're all things to think about, especially in terms of the farm finances. You know, there's tree planting comes with a cost. You know, trees are pretty cheap. It's fencing if you have deer and fencing from the animals. So they're all things to think about, you know, the finances of it. One thing I would say is I came to this project and you're kind of really excited because you're doing this new thing and it's really, you know, like, let's get going. And then you're suddenly like, hang on, the realisation hits that actually this is a long-term project. This isn't something that's going to happen overnight. And so it's having that forethought, you know. You might not have the finances now to do everything all in one go, but it could be that you just have the finances to just change slowly and work with grants and just, you know, just transition yourself. Because time is another big thing as well. Time to put fences in, time to plant trees. As I said, we work within a much wider National Trust team. And so, you know, we are balancing our time all the time because we're trying to do stuff on the farm, we're also trying to help the wider estate, and it's no different for anyone else who is farming. You know, time is precious. And so I think what I'm trying to say is, you know, just have realistic goals, have realistic expectations of yourself. All these things are brilliant things to do, but they're just going to take time and money and a bit of effort to do.